Hey guys, Peter Harper, Managing Director and CEO of the Ascena Family Office. For those of you who are not familiar with the business, we're a multifamily office and we advise foreign families and private clients on US direct investments and mergers and acquisitions. So today we're going to talk about setting up a family office, right? For those that aren't familiar with what a family office is, it is born out of a family or a founder having a material liquidity event, right, or inheriting a large amount of money and really trying to organize their affairs so that there is the same sort of operational structure and infrastructure you'd expect to see in a high-performing business within the family's private assets, right? So, what does that actually mean, right? Well, you've got in the marketplace, it's largely regarded that you've got two types of family offices. Where you've got this concept of a single family office, right? So this is when a family probably has a larger amount of liquidity or more significant complexity in their life, where they feel they need to have, they need to have their own infrastructure rather than shared infrastructure for supporting the family's, investments. So that looks like a full C-suite across, your CEO, investments, tax, accounting, legal, and sort of general sort of infrastructure management, compared with what's called a multifamily office, where a family says, "Hey, listen, we don't think we need to have our own single family office where we've got all of these people on staff. We think we can manage that on a fractional basis." So they'll work with a firm like the Ascena Family Office, who can go out and support them on a fractional basis across accounting, tax, legal, estate planning, wealth management, deal support. And so, the key things that determine whether someone should be oscillating between a single family office versus a multifamily office really comes down to three factors, right? It's the size of a family's wealth and the support, the number of people they think they need to support, right? So the number of family members supported, and then professional support. It's the complexity, right? If someone's got, the largest balance sheet on the planet, but they actually don't have any investments because all their liquidity is sitting in cash, they don't have a whole lot of complexity, and maybe they don't need the complexity of a family office. Whereas even if someone has less liquidity, less wealth, but they've got a whole bunch of complexity in their life, like a larger family that they've got to support, or a very complex asset base, cross-jurisdictional asset base, then that might be a driving factor for their choice to have a family office. And then the final point is the autonomy of the family office, whether they're expecting for folks in a fiduciary capacity to effectively run their lives, sort of run all their investments and manage all the back office stuff without, with minimal influence or minimal impact to the family, or whether they want to be actively engaged in the family, right? Where they're like, no, yes, we've got a family office, but a family member wants to be the CEO of the family office. So let's break down those things a bit more, right? Size of your wealth. At what size should someone be contemplating a family office? I think if you ask a lot of people this question, you'll get many, many different answers. But we're of the view that if you normally wouldn't be thinking about a single family office if you had less wealth than probably $250 million, right? And you probably wouldn't be thinking about a multifamily office unless you had a net worth of less than 50 million. That can vary, right, for different people, but it really comes down to the cost, right? When you're trying to run a full C-suite and the infrastructure around that, that's the cost of that are going to range from $3 to $10 million per annum, right? So unless you've got the wealth to sustain the income, that therefore can sustain the overhead, it's just not going to make any economic sense. The second point, the complexity of your life, like as I mentioned before, we deal with some people sometimes that have immense wealth but really do not have complex lives, right? And they've intentionally structured their affairs that way because they want simplicity. And then we have other families that have immense complexity, right, on a global basis or a domestic basis, right? And that can come down to, how they like to invest, right? That maybe there's a lot of illiquid investments. It's cross-jurisdictional. Maybe it's just the sheer number of family members that are expected to be supported out of the family office, right? Depending on where they are. They might be in different countries, right? So to me, probably the biggest issue that drives choice around a family office is complexity. And so it's obviously there needs to be a materiality point with wealth where that makes sense, but complexity is what's going to drive whether you need someone to run this stuff on your behalf. And then the final point is, around the priorities of the family. There's a lot of great literature out there that talks about, values construction within a family, right? And how you avoid family wealth going from shirt sleeves to shirt sleeves within 3 generations, right? Various cultures around the planet have a similar concept, right? It's just, consistently the data supports that families that don't have a plan are gonna wind up in a position where their money doesn't last a huge amount of time, right? So a lot of the times the priority of the families is that is all about, how important is the wealth that they have today? How important to them is the wealth that they have today is there for future generations, right? And so really that construction around the purpose of the family office and how that's supposed to be managed for future generations will dictate whether it makes sense to have one, right? Because really they're all about multi-gen. It's primarily a tool for multi-gen planning. So I'm often asked by people that are interested in setting up a family office, what questions, if you're in my shoes and you were about to embark on setting up a family office, what questions would you be asking someone like yourself, right? And so it's, again, some of this is repetitive, but I'd be going through the process. I'd be sitting there and saying, okay, what is the objective of the family office? Like, what is the purpose? Why are you doing this, right? As I mentioned before, family offices that are not set up with a long-term framework in place where they're thinking about this for generations that do not exist today are rarely successful. I'd be asking about the scope of their family office. I'd be asking myself, okay, what is it going to do? Is this being set up solely as an investment vehicle, right? So the term family office is really not a correct term. Like maybe it qualifies as a family office in the minds of the SEC, but that doesn't mean that it's a real family office. Family offices are all about, engaging with generations to ensure longevity of wealth, right? So what is the purpose? Is it investments? Is it estate planning? Is it managing other items for the broader family? Is it asset management across real estate where we're saying, hey, listen, these are legacy items that we want to keep for future generations, right? So that's defining that scope and then articulating that plan and having the family kind of buy into that plan is very critical. I'd be asking, again, if you've determined what the role of the family office is, I'd be asking, well, what skills are then needed to run the family office, right? And right, because I think it sounds cool. The idea of having a family office, it's to a lot of people, it sounds cool. But then when you realize the role and work that can go into managing a single family office, right, which it can be significant, right? You need to know, okay, well, what skills do I have the skills? Do you have the skills to be actively involved? Or is this something where you should be setting it up and passing fiduciary responsibility of the family to a group of professionals that have the skills to do that, right? So, the skills are needed. You need someone that has been able to run private enterprise. You need someone that's adept in investments. You need someone that's adept in managing complex familial relationships, right? And then all of the administrative support services that you would ordinarily expect to have around the back of a business. In many cases that a lot of the times these are really centered around investment. So, probably the biggest cost is going to be the chief investment officer. I'd be asking how are future decisions going to be made? I talked about previously the framework of a family office is you're dictating the rule book or the constitution for the broader family and how they should interact when dealing with whatever the assets of the family are, right? And so there's a lot of literature out there that if you read up on the oldest family offices and how they've been so successful, they've been so successful because they've had very, very well thought out rules, and what it means to be engaged in the family, right? To participate in the family office, right? So for me, this is actually one of the more critical facets of a family office, right? It's the once you get a framework around investments and what this thing's going to do to make money, right? It's okay. Well, how do you ensure the capital you have today is still there for future generations? And then for me, if I was going through this process of saying, okay, this seems like a lot, because it is. It's like establishing a startup, getting these people in place, setting up KPIs, and who's going to manage them, right? Are you going to manage? Is the family going to manage them? Is there one person who's doing reviews on these people to make sure they're doing the right thing, and how's proper incentives kind of established around that, right? Or do you want to work with someone like you see a family office on a fractional basis, right? Where you say, hey, listen, yes, we need all this stuff, but we want to outsource it to folks that have the ability to manage this stuff on our behalf through some form of professional partnership, right? And if for every client I've had that's come in and said, hey, listen, yes, help us set up a family office, right? Many of those folks have come through a process where they've determined, after learning the lessons the hard way, to say, okay, we're either closing the family office or we're substantially limiting the roles and responsibilities of the family office because it's more efficient just to do this stuff on an outsourced basis. I'd be asking, what asset levels does this make sense? What does it cease to make sense, right? Again, having a clear understanding of the costs, what you expect, the expected revenue of the family office is going to be, and the likely overhead, and it's a business decision why this is still kind of makes sense. Is really critical, right? And depending on the family, I mean, if they've got a very sort of benevolent framework and they're giving a lot of money away to philanthropy, or they're giving a lot of money away to family members, there might just come a time where the asset base is such that it doesn't make sense to keep the family office in place, right? So being aware of all that stuff up front is super important. I would also be thinking about, the services, what services am I thinking about, right, in the construct and this is why I think it's helpful to go through a sort of a review of, if I was to have a single family office, what would that look like, right? Because when you've done that and you've kind of architected out your own life and you go, okay, these are the people that we would need to run a single family office. I think it's also then easier to establish, well, what you can outsource, right? So maybe you're only having a certain part of that in-house and the rest of it's going to be provided by external professionals. But you need to have a clear sense of what gaps, what it makes sense to have on staff and then external, and then what you can afford as far as a budget to pay those people, right? Because running a single family office, as I indicated before, it can be very costly, particularly if you're trying to get market leading people to support you in areas such as investments. And then I think the other point is that's a good question would be about client service. I mean, I think it's like anything else, when you're dealing with if you're used to dealing with something that's a luxury product, or you've had sort of luxury interactions, right? There's a certain sort of client standard that you would expect, right? Sometimes when some of this stuff is managed internally, right, or through a single family office, it's harder to maintain the quality level, whereas it might be actually easier to do it on an outsourced basis through a multifamily framework. So I think it's really important to sort of ask yourself the question about how important that sort of service standard is. And then I'll also be asking the question around a sustainable operating model, because to set up a single family office is to effectively incubate a new business, right? The purpose of which is to generate profit to sustain the needs of the family, whatever that is, whether that's just operating costs, so whatever they need to run their lives, or to deliver on philanthropic goals, right? Or to have free capital to continue to grow the wealth for future generations, right? In order to be sustainable, the infrastructure needs to be put in place in a way that makes money, or is at least cost neutral to be sustainable, right? Like it would be with any business. And then I'd be asking the question about time, right? That it's one thing to spend a bunch of time setting up a family office, right? Even if you have a bunch of independent folks that are absolute experts, running these things for you, they still need to be managed, right? And that takes time, right? And there's a level of sophistication that may need to exist to have that. So, the biggest thing when, again, making the choice around, do I set up a single family office or a multi-family office, this is a really important question, right? Because it may be the case that you don't have the time or the desire to manage people, so an outsourced fractional option is the best way to go. And then leading on the back of that, it's time, and then and sort of flows into involvement. Like, how involved do you want to be in investment decisions or allocation of capital, right? Because I find sometimes with this notion of single family office, if it's going to be a completely fiduciary type deal, right, where it's going to get set up, maybe you're stepping in for a quarterly board meeting or something, but you're really not actively engaged at all. What's the purpose of doing it in such a way where you've got all this infrastructure, right? If you're effectively trying to set this up so you're out of the picture completely, who's holding who accountable, right? Now, if you get strong people that operate and exist in the fiduciary world, like independent trustees, you can put all that stuff in place. But it requires work, continued work, right? So being real about how much time you're going to commit to this process up front is really important. So, we've talked about, what is a family office, right? We've talked about the three important things that drive it. That drive a decision to set up a single family office, a multi-family office. And then we've talked through a whole bunch of questions that I would look at and ask if I was thinking about setting up a family office, right? So practically, how do I start the process, right? So again, going up the front, got to go out and you've got to work with someone to determine the objectives and the purpose of the family office. The second is you got to determine, the importance of, client service and whether you want to have the headache of managing, people within a single family office. You got to ask yourself, am I ready to start and run a business? Because a single family office is just that, right? It's a business, right? It might be framed around investments, but it's still a business. And then, so you got to answer that question, and then finally you got to determine what your investment philosophy is going to be, right? How you're going to approach investments. So, I'll close out with some tips. What I think are helpful for thinking through the establishment of the family office. So, the first one is, understanding your capital, right? What are your capital needs of the family? What are your investment goals? What are how much risk that you're willing to take on? And how long do you expect your capital to sustain the family? Two, I get really clear about the delegation of responsibilities, right? What are things that you're happy to do and get involved with, and where are you going to expect to be supported by a professional, right? Setting up a single family office, it's just like setting up any other business. It's a mammoth undertaking, and without a really, really strong team, in many cases, it can just create more headaches for a family than the issues it solves. Then I'd be really clear around your vision for investment. If you don't have a vision for investment, make sure you're getting with your financial advisors and wealth team to kind of work that out at the start. Determining, again, the longevity of the investment strategy and how that should play out is really important. So evaluating, what your investment horizon is, and then, what are your short-term capital needs is important. And then take a proactive approach to succession, right? For me, the most critical value of a family office is around legacy planning and the longevity of the investment office, right? I don't honestly see the value of implementing a family office. This is something that's not going to exist outside of the founder's lifetime, right? For me, it's all about legacy and ensuring that the family vision and values survive and thrive for multiple generations. So take a proactive view on succession and engage with family on that really, really early. Cheers, guys. Hope it was helpful.